On the night of January 18th, 2021, 23-year-old Victoria Strauss, a graduate student at Ohio State University, was leaving campus after a long evening of studying. Just weeks away from earning her master's degree in social work, she was filled with hope for the future. Victoria was known for her warmth, kindness, and deep desire to help others. Her dream was to become a therapist, a goal she had worked tirelessly toward. Around 11:30 p.m., Victoria drove into a familiar parking garage in downtown Columbus. She pulled up to the automated pay station to exit. As she reached out of her car window to insert her credit card, it slipped from her fingers and fell to the ground. In a quick attempt to retrieve it, she opened her car door and leaned out to grab the card. But in that moment, her foot accidentally pressed down on the gas pedal. The car lunged forward. The open door slammed into the heavy toll booth structure, trapping Victoria's head between the door and the post. She was pinned, unable to move or call for help. The garage was quiet, and no one was nearby to witness what had just happened. Hours passed before a security guard discovered her. At 5:40 a.m., he spotted her vehicle and immediately called emergency services. Tragically, it was too late. Victoria was pronounced dead at the scene. The police investigation concluded that the incident was a freak accident. No foul play was involved. An autopsy later revealed the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. The report also noted that Victoria had a blood alcohol level of 0.221-, nearly 3 times the legal limit in Ohio. While the alcohol did not cause the crash directly, it likely contributed to the chain of events that led to her death. The news of her passing devastated her family, friends, and classmates. Victoria was deeply loved by those who knew her. Her friends described her as someone who always checked on others, even when she was struggling herself. Before coming to Ohio State, she had been on Florida Atlantic University's cheer and dance team. Dance remained one of her greatest passions, and many of her friends later held tributes in her memory. Ohio State University issued a statement mourning her loss, and grief counselors were made available to support students and staff. Her professors remembered her as a dedicated student with a bright future. Victoria's death served as a heartbreaking reminder of how quickly life can change. A simple everyday action, picking up a dropped credit card, led to a tragic and irreversible outcome. But for those who knew her, she is remembered not for the accident, but for the joy, empathy, and strength she brought into the world. Though her life ended far too soon, Victoria Strauss's spirit lives on in the lives she touched and the legacy of compassion she left behind. It was supposed to be just another routine training mission, an adventurous flight over the beautiful waters east of Florida. For 14 daring young Navy airmen aboard 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, December 5, 1945, was meant to sharpen their navigation skills in the post-W2 calm. Little did they know it would be the final flight they'd ever take, and one that would etch their names into one of history's most enduring mysteries. The war had ended just months earlier. Spirits were high, peace had returned, and the military was transitioning back to peacetime duties. That day, the Flight 19 crew was assigned Navigation Problem Number 1 Inch, a relatively simple exercise. Fly east over the Atlantic to a known target site near the Bahamas, drop dummy bombs on a wrecked ship, turn north over Grand Bahama, then head home to Fort Lauderdale. Easy, right? But they were flying into the Bermuda Triangle, an infamous stretch of ocean bordered by Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. This region has a notorious reputation as Earth's largest maritime graveyard. Ships and aircraft vanish here like magic tricks gone wrong, often without a trace. Pilots and captains alike have reported strange compass failures, bizarre weather shifts, and eerie optical illusions. Some even whisper about aliens, time warps, or underwater cities. Because when science can't explain something, our imagination fills the void. Flight 19 took off at 2:10 p.m. The weather, favorable. The mission on track. But by 3:45 p.m., something had gone terribly wrong. "Cannot see land," came the worried voice of Lieutenant Charles Taylor, the squadron leader and a seasoned combat pilot with 2,500 flying hours. "We seem to be off course." Then silence, then chaos. "We can't find west. Everything is wrong. We can't be sure of any direction. Everything looks strange, even the ocean." Another voice crackled over the radio. The tone turned panicked, disoriented, helpless. Then, chillingly, "It looks like we are entering white water. We're completely lost." And then, nothing. Flight 19 had vanished. Immediately, the Navy scrambled 2 massive PBM-5 Mariner seaplanes to search the last known location. One of those rescue planes carrying 13 crewmen also disappeared. A nearby ship reported seeing a fiery explosion in the sky around the same time. 6 aircraft, 27 men, all gone. No distress beacons and no wreckage, no oil slicks, just silence over the sea. Theories flooded in. Some blamed human error, Taylor possibly mistaking the Bahamas for the Keys due to a faulty compass. Others blamed violent weather or engine failure, but none of that explains the total disappearance. Even modern searches over 250,000 square miles have yielded nothing, not even a wingtip. This single event ignited the myth of the Bermuda Triangle, spawning books, documentaries, and conspiracy theories that stretch to this day. Flight 19's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy, it was the spark that gave the triangle its teeth. Every December 5th, a modest museum in Fort Lauderdale, once the very airbase the flight departed from, hosts a ceremony to honor the lost patrol. Veterans, families, and historians gather, clinging to memory in the face of mystery. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. These men were brave. They trained for war, flew with honor, and vanished in pursuit of duty. Though they never returned, their story endures. Proof that even in peace, danger can hide in plain sight. They died doing what they loved, and for that, they'll never be forgotten. It was a crisp Saturday in 2015 when 24-year-old Kristi Kafka-Laudes laced up her boots for a hike she'd dreamed about since arriving in Norway. A student from Melbourne on exchange at the University of Bergen, Kristi was studying music and cultural studies. She was full of life, drawn to the outdoors, and always up for a challenge. Tunga, Norway's dramatic cliff jutting 700 meters above Lake Ringedalsvatnet, was the perfect adventure. The trail to Tunga is no easy stroll. It's a long, steep hike over rocky terrain, and conditions can be unpredictable. But for thrill seekers and nature lovers, the view from the tongue-shaped rock formation makes every step worth it. That day, Kristi and two friends joined a larger group of around 30 hikers making the trek together. After hours of climbing, they finally reached the summit. The scenery was stunning. Sheer cliffs, glacial lakes, and that famous ledge drawing tourists from all over the world. People posed for photos, edged toward the cliff for the perfect shot, and soaked in the beauty around them. Kristi and her friends waited their turn, chatting and taking in the view. When another group began taking photos near the edge, Kristi stepped aside, moving along a narrow side path to avoid getting in their way. It wasn't for a photo. It wasn't a dare. It was a simple, courteous move, but the ground beneath her feet was unstable, littered with loose rocks. And then it gave way. There was no cry for help, no scream, just silence. Her friends, only steps ahead, turned around to find she was gone. Panic set in. Witnesses who saw the fall rushed to help, but there was little anyone could do. The terrain was remote, with poor cell service, and it took hours for emergency crews to arrive. A helicopter touched down just before midnight, but recovery would have to wait until the following day. Back in Australia, Kristi's family received the devastating news. Rumors quickly circulated that she'd fallen while taking a selfie, but her mother, Millie, was quick to correct the story. Kristi hadn't been showing off or standing at the edge. She had simply been stepping aside when tragedy struck. Bringing Kristi home was another challenge. Norwegian authorities needed time to complete investigations, and it took 10 agonizing days before her body could be returned to her family. Kristi's accident was the first fatality recorded at Tunga. It sparked conversations about safety on the trail. There were no barriers, and many hikers arrived unprepared for the physical demands of the climb. Tour guides reported injuries and rescues every season, and the trail's growing popularity on social media had only increased the risks. Kristi was adventurous, kind, and full of promise. She wasn't just a tourist. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. Her passing was a cruel reminder that nature, while breathtaking, doesn't forgive small missteps. To those who knew her, Tunga will never be just a hiking trail again. It's where a bright light was lost too soon. It was the evening of July 30th, 2008, just another summer day in Canada. A Greyhound bus traveling from Edmonton to Winnipeg carried a group of passengers who expected nothing more than a quiet, routine journey. Among them was 22-year-old Tim McLean, a young man who had just wrapped up a stint working at a carnival. Tired but content, Tim settled into his seat near the back of the bus, headphones on, eyes closed. It was supposed to be just another long ride home. Also on board that day was Vince Li, a man who had boarded the bus in Erickson, Manitoba. At first, he kept to himself, sitting near the front. But partway through the journey, Li unexpectedly moved and took the seat next to Tim. At the time, no one thought much of it, just a stranger changing seats. Tim, still listening to music, didn't stir. What happened next would stun the nation. Without warning, Li pulled out a large knife and began to stab Tim repeatedly in the neck and chest. The bus erupted into chaos. Passengers screamed in horror as the bus driver slammed on the brakes, pulling over on the side of the road. People rushed to escape the unfolding nightmare, flooding out of the vehicle. But Li stayed behind, with Tim. While others watched helplessly from outside, Li continued his brutal assault. A few brave passengers tried to re-enter the bus to help, but he threatened them with the knife, keeping them at bay. Through the windows, onlookers saw images too horrific to forget. When the police finally arrived, the violence had already reached its shocking peak. Tim was dead, and what Li had done was beyond comprehension. Witnesses described behavior so disturbing, it was hard to believe it was real. But as investigations continued, it became clear that Vince Li was suffering from a severe mental illness. Diagnosed with untreated schizophrenia, he later claimed he had been hearing voices he believed were from God, commanding him to act. In 2009, a Manitoba court ruled that Li was not criminally responsible due to his mental state. Instead of prison, he was committed to the Selkirk Mental Health Center for treatment. The court's decision ignited a firestorm across the country. Some argued that Li was ill and needed compassion and care. Others were outraged that someone who had committed such a violent act wouldn't face prison time. Tim's mother, Carol Dedeli, became a powerful voice for change. Her grief was unimaginable, but what haunted her even more was the idea that the man who killed her son might one day walk free. And in time, that's exactly what happened. In 2015, Li, now calling himself Will Baker, was granted supervised day trips outside the hospital. By 2017, he received an absolute discharge. That meant no criminal record, no restrictions, as long as he continued treatment and checked in with doctors. The ruling sparked national debate. Many, like Carol, felt betrayed by the system. She believed that people found not criminally responsible still needed long-term oversight and consequences. Baker later expressed remorse, but for many, it wasn't enough. The case raised complex questions about justice, mental illness, and public safety, questions Canada is still grappling with today. It was supposed to be the ultimate test of endurance, an adventurous solo trek to the top of the world. For David Sharp, a 34-year-old British engineer turned daredevil mountaineer, Mount Everest wasn't just a goal, it was the holy grail of human willpower. He'd climbed Kilimanjaro, conquered the Matterhorn, and stood atop Chow, all without the help of supplemental oxygen. But in May of 2006, Sharp embarked on what would tragically become his last expedition. Mount Everest, standing at a mind-melting 29,032 feet, is known for more than its beauty. It's also a deadly place. Above 8,000 meters lies the death zone, where oxygen is so scarce the human body literally begins to shut down. Frostbite, hallucinations, and suffocation aren't rare. They're expected. To survive up there, you need oxygen tanks, guides, teamwork, and maybe a bit of luck. Sharp had none of the above. A purist at heart, Sharp believed using oxygen was cheating. He wanted to feel the raw force of nature, to battle Everest with nothing but his lungs, his boots, and sheer grit. He even took the budget route, a $6,200 basic service package from a Nepalese agency called Asian Trekking. For reference, that's like showing up to fight a dragon in flip-flops when everyone else brought armor. On May 13, 2006, David made his final summit attempt. No guides, no radio, no backup plan, just a quiet British man pushing toward the top of the world. What happened next is shrouded in mystery. Some climbers claimed they saw him near the summit, but by May 14th he was found slumped inside Green Boots Cave, a notorious overhang named after another fallen climber whose neon boots became a landmark. Sharp was alive, barely. He'd crawled into the cave suffering from extreme frostbite, oxygen depletion, and likely hypothermia. A team of Turkish climbers passed him. Others from a commercial expedition led by Russell Bryce also saw him, but no rescue was mounted. The brutal reality? In the death zone, helping someone could mean dying yourself. One Sherpa tried. Sharp whispered, "My name is David Sharp. I'm with Asian Trekking and I just want to sleep." And with that, he did. Forever. Around 40 climbers walked past him that day. Some offered oxygen or checked his pulse, but most kept moving. The summit was calling. News of his death caused an uproar. Viral videos and interviews questioned the humanity of Everest climbers. Was it ambition? Self-preservation? Or had Everest become a trophy graveyard? Sharp's death sparked global debate about the ethics of mountaineering and whether some goals just aren't worth dying for. A year later, Sherpas respectfully moved his body off the trail. He now rests among more than 200 other souls frozen into Everest's slopes. What makes this story so heartbreaking isn't just that David died, it's that he died surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't unprepared. He was simply too stubborn, too devoted to purity, too human. David Sharp died doing what he loved, chasing something bigger than himself. And maybe in that silent, snow-covered cave, he reached his summit in a different way. On July 18th, 2023, 71-year-old Steve Curry laced up his hiking boots and headed out for what was supposed to be just another adventure. A seasoned outdoorsman from Sunland, California, Steve had spent his life chasing the thrill of the wild, rock climbing, mountain biking, hiking through the harshest terrain he could find. To him, nature wasn't something to fear. It was home. That morning, he set off into Death Valley National Park, one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. The sun was already blazing, and by the afternoon, the temperature had climbed to a blistering 121 degrees Fahrenheit, 49 degrees Celsius. Most people were staying inside, or, at the very least, far from the scorching desert trails. But not Steve. He had hiked from Golden Canyon to Zabriskie Point, a popular lookout that offers panoramic views of the arid, surreal landscape. There, he ran into a reporter from the Los Angeles Times. The heat was brutal. When asked why he'd chosen to hike in such extreme conditions, Steve just smiled and said, "Why not?" He was wearing a sun hat, sunscreen, and carried a backpack, confident and prepared. Or so it seemed. What many forget, or simply don't realize, is that Death Valley doesn't play fair. It's the hottest place on the planet, home to the world record temperature of 134 degrees Fahrenheit, 57 degrees Celsius, recorded back in 1913. The canyon walls don't just hold the heat, they amplify it, bouncing the sun's rays back at you from every direction. Even seasoned hikers can find themselves overwhelmed. Steve continued his trek despite warnings from park officials about the dangers of venturing out after mid-morning. As he made his way back toward the trailhead, the unrelenting heat finally caught up with him. Around 3:40 p.m., just steps from a restroom near the Golden Canyon trailhead, Steve collapsed. Bystanders rushed to help and called 911. Park rangers arrived quickly and performed CPR, even using a defibrillator in hopes of reviving him. But it was too late. Steve had succumbed to the intense heat. He died doing what he loved, but underestimating one of the most dangerous forces in nature. Back home, his wife, Rima, had no idea where Steve had gone that morning. She expected him to walk through the door later that day, tired but smiling. Instead, she found a coroner's notice pinned to their front door. Her worst fear had come true. Speaking to reporters afterward, Rima painted a picture of a man who was endlessly curious, fearless, and full of life. Steve loved sleeping under the stars, cooking by campfire, and pushing himself on rugged trails. But she also shared a sobering truth. The heat, she said, is not a foe you can overcome. Death Valley's dangers are real, and they don't discriminate. The park is vast, mostly unshaded, and nearly void of natural water sources. Even experienced hikers like Steve can fall victim to heat stroke when the body's cooling system shuts down, leading to dizziness, confusion, unconsciousness, and, in severe cases, death. The location where Steve collapsed is far from immediate help. High temperatures in the area also make helicopter rescues more difficult or even impossible. That same summer, another man died after his car's air conditioning failed, leaving him stranded in the intense heat. Death Valley saw 29 days of 110 degrees Fahrenheit, plus temperatures that season alone. Still, people keep coming. Some are drawn by the challenge. Others simply don't realize the risk until it's too late. Park rangers continue to urge visitors, avoid hiking after 10 a.m., stay hydrated, wear light clothing, and most importantly, know when to turn back. Steve Curry was no amateur. He respected nature, but in the end, even a lifetime of experience wasn't enough to outmatch Death Valley. His story serves as a powerful reminder. Adventure is thrilling, but survival always comes first. As Rima said, the heat is not a foe you can overcome, and sometimes knowing when not to go is the bravest thing you can do. It was December 4th, 2016, a day that was supposed to mark the beginning of a new life for 32-year-old Rosemary do Nascimento Silva. Living in Sao Paulo, Brazil, she had long dreamed of making her wedding day not only memorable but magical. To surprise her fiancé, Uderley Damasceno, Rosemary made a bold and romantic decision. She would arrive at their wedding ceremony in a helicopter. Only a handful of people knew about the plan. She wanted her entrance to be dramatic, private, and unforgettable. The wedding was set to take place at Recanto Beija-Flor, a large scenic venue in the city of Osasco, just outside Sao Paulo. Over 300 guests had been invited, and everything was going perfectly. The sun was out, decorations were in place, and music floated through the venue. But the bride was still missing, and only 6 people knew why. At around 4 p.m., Rosemary boarded a Robinson R-44 helicopter at a nearby hangar. With her were her brother Silvano Nascimento da Silva, the couple's wedding photographer Nilda Cristina Neves, who was 6 months pregnant, and the pilot Peterson Pinheiro. The flight was meant to be brief, no more than 15 minutes. As the rotor blades spun up and the helicopter lifted off, Rosemary smiled out the window. Video footage taken inside the aircraft captured her excitement. She looked radiant, dressed in white, her dream unfolding in real time. But not long after takeoff, the skies began to darken. Weather conditions shifted rapidly. Thick fog began rolling in, followed by rain. Visibility plummeted. What had started as a clear afternoon became dangerous within minutes. Inside the helicopter, calm turned to chaos. The onboard camera recorded the atmosphere turning tense. Alarms began to beep. The once steady camera began to shake. Passengers could be heard screaming as the aircraft struggled in the worsening weather. Pilot Peterson tried to stabilize the helicopter, but it was a losing battle. Disoriented by the fog and with almost no visual cues, the helicopter drifted off course. Investigators believe it may have clipped a tree in a heavily forested area less than a mile from the wedding venue before crashing violently to the ground. The impact was catastrophic. All 4 people aboard were killed instantly. Back at the venue, the wedding guests were still unaware of the tragedy unfolding nearby. Many were simply waiting for the ceremony to begin, assuming a minor delay. Only the small group involved in the helicopter plan began to grow concerned. When a call confirmed that the helicopter had indeed departed on time, anxiety set in. Then came word of a nearby helicopter crash. At first, no one made the connection. But when details began to match, a sense of dread spread through the venue. Uderley, the groom, was standing at the altar waiting for his bride when he received the news. In just a few words, his entire world shattered. Rosemary, her brother, the photographer, and the pilot were gone. The wedding that had been so full of joy just moments earlier dissolved into grief and disbelief. Authorities launched a full investigation. It was discovered that while the helicopter was licensed and its registration valid until early 2017, it had been operating over its recommended passenger limit. It was designed for only 3 passengers, but 4 people had been on board that day. Investigators cited the combination of bad weather, poor visibility, and overloading as contributing factors to the crash. They concluded that the pilot had likely become disoriented due to the fog, causing him to lose control. 8 fire crews responded to the crash, but there was nothing anyone could do. In the days and weeks that followed, friends, family, and even strangers across Brazil mourned the lives lost. The story dominated headlines not only because of the scale of the tragedy, but because of the heartbreaking context. A bride, full of joy and love, dying just moments before she was to be married. The footage from inside the helicopter was later released as part of the investigation. It offered a haunting glimpse into those final moments, images of hope, panic, and an end that came far too soon. Rosemary's dream was never realized. What should have been the happiest day of her life became one of unimaginable sorrow. Today, the story remains one of the most tragic wedding day incidents ever recorded. For Uderley and the families of those who died, the memory of that day is etched in grief. It is a painful reminder of how fragile life is, and how even the most beautiful plans can unravel in an instant. It was supposed to be another adrenaline-fueled day for Ian Forgaze, a seasoned 54-year-old backcountry skier from Lincoln, Vermont, as he carved through the rugged, snow-draped slopes of New Hampshire's Mount Washington. Known for embracing nature's harshest playgrounds, Ian was no rookie. He had skied solo before, danced with danger on technical lines, and trusted his instincts where others wouldn't even venture. But on February 1st, 2021, his thirst for adventure would take a tragic turn. Mount Washington, the crown jewel of the White Mountains, is as breathtaking as it is brutal. Its beauty masks its danger, bone-chilling winds, unpredictable weather, and, most treacherous of all, avalanches. The Ammonoosuc Ravine, where Ian set off that fateful morning, rests on the mountain's western flank. It's lesser known than the infamous Tuckerman Ravine, but no less lethal. The snowpack there is fickle, and even when experts rate the avalanche danger as low, Mother Nature has her own rulebook. And so, with temperatures in the single digits and winds gusting at 33 miles per hour, Ian skied out alone. That day's forecast warned of small avalanches possible in isolated upper elevations, technical terms. But to Ian, it likely felt like a green light. But deep in the ravine lay a terrain trap, a natural funnel where snow, once loosened, doesn't just slide, it collapses. Tragically, that's exactly where Ian ventured. One wrong move onto a fragile pocket of wind-drifted snow triggered a slide that buried him under nearly 13 feet of compacted white. The chilling part? It didn't stop there. The avalanche was only the beginning. The snow kept falling the next day, and yet another slide buried him deeper. Ian had an avalanche transceiver, a beacon that could have led rescuers to him, and it did. But by the time search teams detected the signal on February 3rd, it was too late. It took rescuers over an hour and a half to dig him out, but Ian had already succumbed to asphyxiation. The rescue involved New Hampshire Fish and Game, the Mount Washington Avalanche Center, the Forest Service, and volunteers from the Mountain Rescue Service, a testament to the respect and concern Ian commanded. A detailed report followed, not to cast blame, but to honor the harsh truths of the mountain. Ian was not reckless. He was experienced, calculated, even prepared. But as one avalanche expert famously said, "It is good you are all experts, but the avalanche, it does not know that you are experts." What makes this case so haunting isn't just the death, it's how preventable it seemed. Ian was trained, equipped, and cautious, but he was alone, skiing over a thin snowpack above a known danger zone in a spot no skier had ever died before. He became the first, and perhaps that's the most gut-wrenching part, knowing that even with the best gear and experience, nature still writes the final chapter. In a world of GPS apps and smartwatches, there's something raw about the mountains, a reminder that the wilderness remains untamed. For thrill seekers like Ian, it's not about conquering nature, but about dancing with it. And sometimes the music stops too soon. He died doing what he loved. And though the snow took him, his story now echoes through the peaks. A solemn warning, a respected legacy, and a life remembered not just for how it ended, but for how fully it was lived. It was a cold, rainy day, November 27th, 2017, deep in the Chernobyl exclusion zone in Ukraine. Dimmitri Schkinder, a 33-year-old urban explorer from Zhodzina, Belarus, was doing what he loved most, venturing into places most people wouldn't dare step foot in. This time, his destination was Chernobyl 2, a heavily restricted military zone tucked within one of the most radioactive regions on Earth. Dimmitri wasn't alone. He was joined by two friends, a man and a woman, both fellow explorers. They were part of a niche community known as stalkers, urban adventurers who illegally sneak into forbidden or abandoned areas. For them, the risk was part of the thrill, and in this world, Chernobyl is the ultimate prize. After the 1986 nuclear disaster, Chernobyl and the surrounding areas were evacuated and sealed off, left to decay in silence. But the ruins attracted a different kind of visitor, people like Dimmitri, drawn by mystery, danger, and the ghostly remains of a world frozen in time. Chernobyl, too, in particular, was infamous. Hidden behind fences and radiation signs stood the Tunga radar, a massive Cold War relic, 150 meters tall, made of rusted steel beams and eerie, decaying platforms. Once used to detect incoming missiles, it now loomed like a skeleton over the forest, calling to explorers like a siren. But this wasn't a good day for climbing. The weather was rough. Strong winds and steady rain had turned every metal rung slick and treacherous. Still, Dimmitri and his male friend couldn't resist. They wanted to reach the top of the Tunga, to conquer one of the most iconic and illegal climbs in the world. Their female companion stayed on the ground, watching. Dimmitri was no amateur. He had years of experience exploring decaying buildings and forgotten ruins. He was known for being careful, methodical, even in dangerous conditions. But no amount of skill could protect him from what happened next. As they climbed higher into the storm, a powerful gust of wind hit. The rain-slicked steel offered no grip. In a split second, Dimmitri slipped. He fell 15 meters, his body slamming against the cold metal structure before crashing down. His friend could do nothing but scream for help. Emergency services were called, and an ambulance arrived quickly, but it was already too late. Dimmitri didn't survive the fall. The urban exploration community was stunned. Dimmitri had a reputation for being cautious, someone who respected the risks. His death hit hard. To make it even more haunting, just moments before he fell, Dimmitri had taken one final photo, an eerie snapshot from high above the trees, capturing the view from the top of the radar. It would be the last thing he ever saw. The tragedy didn't end with his fall. Authorities responded swiftly. His two companions, despite their shock, were charged with illegally entering a restricted zone. Both were fined, and the woman, who had never even left the ground, faced deportation. Dimmitri's body was transported back to Belarus, where a grieving wife and 3 children waited for a husband and father who would never return. His death became a sobering reminder. Even the most experienced explorers aren't invincible. Chernobyl, too, remains a chilling monument, not just to Soviet history, but to the dangers of pushing past the boundaries of safety in search of adrenaline. Urban explorers still sneak into the zone, driven by curiosity, thrill, or the desire for the perfect photo. But Dimmitri's story stands as a warning. Some places are abandoned for a reason, and sometimes the cost of adventure is a price too high to pay. It was an ordinary afternoon in 2015 in the quiet village of Liuzhuang, nestled in China's Shandong province. 6-year-old Xiao Li was outside, laughing and running around with his friends during a carefree game of hide-and-seek, the kind of childhood moment most parents take comfort in. But this playful day would take a horrifying turn that no one in the village could have anticipated. As he ran around the yard, Xiao Li spotted something on the ground, a lollipop. It was unwrapped, but looked clean, as if someone had just dropped it. To a young child, it seemed like a lucky find. Without hesitation, he picked it up, popped it in his mouth, and continued playing. What Xiao Li didn't know was that this wasn't an ordinary piece of candy. It had been deliberately coated with tetramine, a highly toxic chemical commonly used in illegal rat poison. Tetramine, sometimes called TETS, is dangerously potent. A dose as small as 7 to 10 milligrams can cause severe damage, attacking the nervous system with terrifying speed. It's been banned in many countries since the 1980s, but black market versions still circulate, especially in rural parts of China. And on that day, it found its way into the hands of an innocent child. Not long after eating the lollipop, Xiao Li collapsed behind a bush. His friends, still playing nearby, heard the thud and rushed over. What they saw was nightmare-inducing. Xiao Li was unconscious, his skin pale, and he was bleeding from his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. Terrified, the children ran to get help. His father, Jin Sui, found Xiao Li barely clinging to life. He scooped him up and raced to Ji County Hospital. Doctors quickly realized the severity of his condition. The toxin had already started ravaging his internal organs. His blood had turned dark, and his vital signs were unstable. He was soon transferred to a larger facility, Jining Medical University Hospital, for advanced care. For 2 days, doctors fought to save him, but the poison was too strong. Xiao Li died from severe organ failure caused by the tetramine. Tests later confirmed that the lollipop had been intentionally laced with the poison. This wasn't a tragic accident. It was a calculated act. Even more chilling, authorities found additional poisoned lollipops scattered around the yard. Police determined they hadn't been thrown in, they were carefully placed, which meant someone had entered the property, walked around unnoticed, and laid a deadly trap specifically where children would find it. Detectives began digging into possible motives. Who would target a child this way? Was someone trying to get revenge on the family? Had the parents been in a dispute with anyone? Despite a thorough investigation, no one has ever been arrested. The case remains open with more questions than answers. Xiao Li's death sparked national concern over the availability of banned substances like tetramine. How does such a dangerous chemical continue to circulate? Why is it still so accessible despite the ban? Authorities have tried to crack down on illegal sales, but the black market persists, and tragedies like this prove just how deadly that access can be. For Xiao Li's family, the pain is permanent. A father lost his son to a piece of poisoned candy. A village was left grieving, and somewhere out there, the person who did it is still unknown. This heartbreaking case is a reminder that even the smallest object, something as innocent as a lollipop, can hide unimaginable danger. And the cruelest part? Xiao Li never had a chance to know what was coming. For most people, an adventure to a remote tropical island sounds like a dream vacation. Turquoise waters, untouched beaches, and the thrill of exploring the unknown. For 26-year-old John Allen Chow, it was more than that. It was a sacred mission, an opportunity to bring the love of Jesus to a tribe untouched by the modern world. But what John didn't know, or perhaps knew all too well, was that this mission would not only be his greatest test of faith, but his final journey. It was November 2018, and John had just arrived in India's far-flung Andaman and Nicobar Islands, a stunning archipelago of 836 islands, many of them wild, mysterious, and shrouded in danger. Among them, North Sentinel Island stood apart, a forbidden zone. No hotels, no tours, no welcome signs, just a dense canopy of jungle, the sound of waves, and a people who've made it violently clear for decades they do not want visitors. The Sentinelese are believed to be descendants of the earliest humans to migrate out of Africa, untouched by modern civilization, isolated for tens of thousands of years. Their hostility to outsiders isn't just legendary, it's deadly. They've shot arrows at helicopters, killed lost fishermen, and live completely off the grid. Stepping foot on North Sentinel means risking your life, and the Indian government makes it illegal to even approach the island within 3 miles. But John Chow wasn't deterred. A devout Christian and adventure seeker from Washington State, John had dreamed of sharing the gospel with remote tribes since college. He trained for this. He took immunizations to avoid infecting the tribe. He studied linguistics. He knew the risks. In his journal, he wrote, "I don't want to die. Would it be wiser to leave and let someone else continue? No, I think I'm called to do this." On November 15th, 2018, after bribing local fishermen with $325 to get close to the island, John paddled ashore in a kayak. He came bearing gifts, a football, scissors, and fish. But instead of a welcome party, he was greeted by arrows. One, he later wrote, hit his Bible. He swam back to the boat that night, shaken but undeterred. The next morning, he tried again. What happened next was only seen from a distance. The fishermen watched in horror as islanders dragged John's body along the beach, then buried it. They returned to Port Blair and broke the news. Police soon arrested 7 people for helping John reach the island. Meanwhile, Indian authorities debated whether to retrieve his body, knowing full well that approaching the Sentinelese could trigger more violence or expose them to modern diseases. Aerial surveillance later confirmed what the fishermen saw, a grave on the sand. The incident exploded across global media. Videos, think pieces, and fiery tweets debated whether John was a martyr or a misguided intruder. "This is not missionary work, it's suicide," said one critic. Others saw bravery in his faith. But make no mistake, North Sentinel Island is one of the most dangerous places on Earth, not because of venomous snakes or volcanoes, but because it is humanity untouched and fiercely protected. Survival there isn't about gear or guts. It's about knowing when to stay away. John's family grieved, but forgave his killers. In a public statement, they called him a beloved son, brother, uncle, and best friend. His church saw him as someone who died doing what he believed in, despite the cost. He wasn't reckless in preparation, he was reckless in conviction. And maybe that's the tragedy, not just that John Chow died, but that in his final act of devotion, he met people who didn't need saving, and never asked to be found. It was a clear, crisp evening in January 2025 when 21-year-old Eve McCarthy set out for a climb in southern Spain. A final-year physiology student from Shankill, Dublin, Eve was no stranger to adventure. That day, she and a male climbing partner had chosen the stunning yet notoriously dangerous trail near El Caminito del Rey, a place as breathtaking as it is deadly. This former worker's path, built into the cliffs of El Chorro Gorge, is now a tourist hotspot for thrill seekers. The trail hugs the rock face hundreds of feet above the ground, with sections so narrow that a single misstep could be fatal. And while it's been renovated in recent years, many parts remain treacherous, especially near the Swiss sector and Arabic staircase, where Eve was climbing. Around 7 p.m. as they began their descent through a particularly unstable section, something went terribly wrong. Both Eve and her climbing partner lost their footing. He managed to grab onto a bush-covered rock, miraculously stopping his fall. Eve wasn't as lucky. She plunged nearly 500 feet into the ravine below. Despite the quick response of emergency crews, she had not survived. Her climbing partner was rescued alive, shaken but safe. Eve's body was recovered shortly afterward. The news of her death shook not only her family and friends, but the wider community back home in Dublin and the outdoor world alike. Shockingly, hers was the second fatal fall on that same stretch of trail within a month. Back in Shankill, Eve was remembered as so much more than just a victim of a tragic accident. She was vibrant, outgoing, and full of energy, the kind of person who made friends wherever she went. She worked part-time at King's Pub in Dalkey, where she was known for her quick wit, infectious laugh, and ability to light up a room. The pub closed its doors for 3 days in her honor. Her parents, Helen and Paul McCarthy, were heartbroken. In a moving tribute, they described Eve as a bright light in the lives of everyone who knew her, fiercely determined, endlessly curious, and always kind. She had a passion for basketball, and though she wasn't the tallest on the court, her speed and grit made her a force to be reckoned with. Friends remembered how their house was always full. Eve had that way of bringing people together. Whether it was for a spontaneous road trip or a late-night chat over tea, she was always up for an adventure. That adventurous spirit is part of what led her to Spain and to Caminito del Rey. Her funeral at St. Anne's Church in Shankill was packed. So many came that some had to watch the service from the parish center and even online. Former classmates, neighbors, co-workers, and teammates all gathered to say goodbye, sharing memories of the girl who never stopped moving, dreaming, or laughing. Eve's passing served as a grim reminder of the risks that come with high adrenaline travel. Just a month earlier, a 20-year-old British climber lost his life in the same area. Despite new safety measures, such as handrails, harness lines, and repaired walkways, the trail still poses real danger. The altitude, unstable ground, and narrow paths make it unforgiving even for seasoned climbers. Eve McCarthy's life was cut short far too soon, but her impact was undeniable. She was a spark, someone who lived boldly and loved deeply. Her story is one of adventure, spirit, and heartbreaking loss. Though she's no longer here, the people who loved her carry her memory forward every day. And for those who walk dangerous paths, her story is a reminder to never take a single step for granted. It was a quiet Saturday evening in 2017 in Jesenik, a small town tucked away in the northeastern Czech Republic. A 65-year-old mother and her 45-year-old daughter were enjoying what was meant to be a peaceful visit to a friend's garden home. The highlight of their evening? A relaxing session in the private sauna, something so ordinary it didn't seem to carry any risk at all. For a while, everything seemed fine. The women had been inside the sauna for some time, unwinding in the warmth. But as more minutes passed, their friend, who owned the home, started to feel uneasy. Something wasn't right. The women had been inside far longer than usual. Concerned, she finally decided to check on them. What she found was horrifying. Both women were lying motionless on the sauna floor. The heat was suffocating, and it quickly became clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The sauna door's handle had broken, trapping them inside with no way out. They had tried desperately to escape. Evidence of their struggle was all around. The small glass window in the sauna door had been shattered from the inside, and broken glass lay scattered on the ground. Towels were tossed across the floor, a heartbreaking sign of their panicked effort to survive. Emergency services were called immediately, but it was already too late. When police and paramedics arrived, they confirmed the worst. Both the mother and daughter had died from heat stroke, their bodies overwhelmed by the rising temperature and the inability to escape. It was a scene that left responders shaken. 2 lives lost in what should have been a harmless moment of relaxation. Photos taken by the authorities painted a clear and chilling picture. One image showed the broken door handle, the very thing that sealed their fate. Another captured the cracked glass from their attempted escape. These details, small on their own, told a gut-wrenching story when put together. According to police spokesperson Eva Kormosova, the women had likely been trapped for around 90 minutes before they were discovered. That delay proved fatal. As the investigation unfolded, questions began to surface. Was the sauna equipment properly maintained? Had the door handle shown signs of wear? Could the tragedy have been prevented with regular safety checks? These weren't just technical questions. They were the key to understanding how such an unimaginable accident had occurred. The case sparked wider concern about private saunas and their safety standards. While public facilities often follow strict codes, personal setups don't always face the same level of scrutiny. The town of Jesenik was left in shock. Neighbors and friends mourned the sudden, senseless loss of 2 women who simply wanted a quiet evening together. The sauna, once seen as a source of peace and comfort, had turned into a death trap. The broken hardware, the shattered window, and the untouched towels were now haunting symbols of what went wrong. This tragic story is a reminder of how fragile safety can be. One faulty piece of equipment, one moment of delay, can turn something familiar into something fatal. It's a painful lesson in just how quickly a calm evening can spiral into catastrophe. It was supposed to be a perfect summer day. Blue skies, family barbecue, laughter echoing by the water. For Aaron Page, an energetic 8-year-old daredevil from Pontefract, West Yorkshire, it was his birthday. The kind of day you dream about as a kid. June 5th, 2021, one of the hottest days of the year. Seemed like the perfect time for Aaron and his family to swap their backyard barbecue plans for a spontaneous trip to Bolton Abbey, a popular beauty spot nestled in North Yorkshire's rolling hills. But what none of them knew was that the river wharf, sparkling in the sun, was hiding a dark and deadly secret. At first glance, Bolton Abbey looks like something out of a fairy tale. Stone bridges, wooded trails, families skipping stones. But the river that flows through it is anything but gentle. The river wharf, especially near a notorious section called the Strid, is one of the most deceptive and dangerous bodies of water in the UK. It narrows sharply, forcing gallons of water through tight rocky crevices, creating powerful undercurrents that can suck even the strongest swimmer under. It's been said that no one who's fallen in there has ever made it out alive. To survive this place, you need more than just swimming skills. You need knowledge of the river's hidden perils, proper safety gear, and frankly, a good deal of luck. Aaron, the youngest of 5 and known by his family as a bit of a wild spirit, had his eyes on the teens jumping from a tree into the water upstream. "I'm doing that," he declared with birthday boy confidence. His dad, Alan, quickly shut it down. "No, you're not," he warned, and they meant it. No one had planned to go swimming, but tragedy doesn't always wait for a plan. As the family set up their barbecue just past 2 p.m., Aaron's dad asked his older brother Joshua to walk him to the toilet, just 200 yards from the picnic spot. The boys wandered onto a cobbled beach near the riverbank, standing ankle-deep on slick rocks. In a heartbreaking moment that Joshua later recounted at the inquest, Aaron slipped. "I tried to pull him out," Joshua said, "but I slipped. I let go." Panic erupted. Joshua's screams were heard by nearby paddlers. Andrea Campbell, a day tripper, dove in without hesitation. "I could just see his head under the water," she cried at the inquest, but the current was too strong. One moment Aaron was there, then he was gone. A full-scale rescue effort began. Police divers, the Yorkshire Air Ambulance, 28 volunteer rescuers, and frantic members of the public scoured the river. For 3 excruciating hours, Aaron's family waited. At 6:25 p.m., the worst was confirmed. His body was found downstream, lifeless. He had drowned. Videos and tributes soon flooded social media, turning Aaron into a symbol of just how unforgiving nature can be. The tragedy sparked renewed calls for better signage and safety measures around the river wharf, especially near Bolton Abbey and the Strid. The most tragic part? Aaron didn't do anything reckless. He didn't dive from a tree. He wasn't even swimming. He simply slipped on his birthday. But Aaron Page died surrounded by family who adored him, and his brother did everything he could. He died on a day filled with love, laughter, and sunshine, and that's how he'll be remembered. On October 30th, 2019, Dung Yukang, a bright university senior from Hunan, China, set out on what she hoped would be a memorable adventure. She was heading to the Huashan Scenic Area in Shanxi Province, a place known not just for its jaw-dropping beauty, but also for its reputation as one of China's most dangerous hikes. Towering peaks, sheer cliffs, and thrilling trails attract thousands every year, and Dung was excited to experience it for herself. Like many travelers today, Dung wanted to document her journey. She posted photos and updates throughout her hike, sharing the stunning scenery and her joy with friends and family back home. Everything seemed to be going well, but none of them could have known those would be the last photos she'd ever post. Her final stop was the West Peak Observation Deck, a popular viewing spot perched high above the ground. The view from there is nothing short of spectacular, with panoramic sights that stretch across the rugged mountainscape. But there was a catch. The safety railings at that deck were shockingly low, just about 60 centimeters high, barely reaching an adult's thigh. Like many tourists, Dung wanted a perfect shot to mark the moment. She stood near the edge, adjusting her phone for the best angle. With her back to the drop, she leaned in slightly to get it just right, but the surface beneath her was uneven, and in a split second her foot slipped. She lost her balance and fell backward over the railing. The drop was over 2,000 meters. No one noticed immediately. It wasn't until the next day that search and rescue teams located her body. Security footage later confirmed what had happened. Dung had slipped while taking a selfie. There were 5 tourists and 2 staff members on the deck that day, but no one could react quickly enough to stop the tragedy. In the aftermath, the Huashan Scenic Area Management addressed the incident but denied any fault. According to them, the railing met safety standards, and Dung's fall was the result of her own actions. They initially offered her family a sum of 40,000 yuan, about $5,700, as humanitarian aid, but again accepted no responsibility. Her family was devastated and outraged. To them, the idea that 60-centimeter railings were considered safe on a mountaintop observation deck was absurd. They also criticized the delayed response in locating Dung after her fall, arguing that faster action might have made a difference. The family questioned whether park staff had truly warned tourists about the risks. Management claimed they had, but Dung's loved ones weren't convinced. They believed that with stronger barriers and better precautions, this tragedy could have been prevented. As public pressure grew and media coverage intensified, the park eventually increased the offer to 170,000 yuan, about $24,000. But even then, they continued to insist they weren't to blame. Dung's death sparked wider conversations about safety in popular but hazardous tourist destinations like Huashan Mountain. Despite its beauty, the mountain is infamous for its narrow trails, vertical drops, and sections where visitors must walk on wooden planks bolted to cliff sides. Official fatality numbers are hard to come by, but it's believed that dozens may lose their lives there each year. Dung's story became a chilling reminder of how easily things can go wrong when we underestimate the dangers of nature, especially in the pursuit of that perfect photo. Her family fought not just for compensation, but for accountability and for better safety measures so no one else would suffer the same fate. Still, the park held its ground, claiming the tragedy was unavoidable. Today, Huashan continues to draw thousands of thrill seekers, its risks unchanged. And Dung Yukang's story remains a haunting reminder that behind every breathtaking view, danger can quietly wait just one step away.